We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us today for the Meet the Farm Hands video segment. I'm your host, Hannah Pagel, and today we are with Matt Mika with Tyson Foods. Matt, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me today. It's great to be here.
So to kick off the interview, let's just go back to the beginning and kind of talk about how you made your way out to D.C. You have ties in Mississippi and in Michigan, right?
That's correct, yeah. Born in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and then moved to Metro Detroit, suburb just north of Detroit, Southfield, about 9 or 10 years old, and then came out to D.C. in 2004. But my brother went to school here at GW in the 90s, so I've been visiting D.C. since the mid-90s.
Okay, and what made you want to get into politics and work here in D.C.?
So my stepsister was a chief of staff to a state senator back in Michigan, and then her mom, my stepmom, was a lobbyist. My dad's been involved in his job in coming up to D.C. and lobbying for the American Library Association. My brother worked at the DCCC when he was here at GW. So I needed an internship between my freshman and sophomore year at college, back in Adrian College, back in Michigan. And so my stepsister got me an internship with the then Lieutenant Governor of Michigan, Dick Posthumus. And he was born and raised on a farm, still had a farm, and then was very much involved in agriculture. So all the policy and work I did that summer was very much around agriculture and farming.
Was that like your first exposure to the agriculture industry?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Michigan. I like meat and potatoes. I like to eat. Did not grow up on a farm, but have a complete love and admiration for folks that are, raising our food, raising our crops, raising our animals. It's such a hard job, and now been doing it for over 20 years. Just complete understand of the whole supply chain from the farm to the table.
Mm-hmm. So you worked on quite a few campaigns, and then you also worked on the Hill. So would you say there's like a big difference between the experience on either side, or is one more challenging than the other?
They're just completely different. So I spent roughly 5 to 6 years in Lansing working at the state level for the Lieutenant Governor, and I worked for State Rep Dave Pelsrock. His whole district was all agriculture. Helped him on his campaign twice, worked for then, when Posthumus then ran for governor, worked on his race and did some local races. But I'd say from the campaign side to policy side, campaign side, you're meeting with folks, you're talking about it, but when you get more into the policy side, working for a state rep or governor or member of Congress like I did here in DC, it's much more policy oriented, and you're actually working on the issues. When you're doing campaign, you're just talking with people and trying to figure out what they're motivated with, and then talking with that candidate who's running to figure out which policies then they can affect when they get elected at that local, federal, or state level.
You also helped work on the 2008 Farm Bill. So do you have like any, like war stories of negotiations you had to do, or late nights in the office?
A lot of late nights, and 2008 is completely different than it is today. Back then, we actually did markup at the subcommittee level and full committee. It was very bipartisan. There was times when I was working with, folks that have been around the Hill for 20 and 30 years that we would come up with amendments and secondary amendments and third degree amendments to go after someone if we didn't like the proposal, or if we did. And everything was based on commodities or what states you were from. So a lot of times I was working with folks, I worked for a member from Michigan, Tim Wahlberg. He was a freshman on the Ag Committee. And I was working with folks from Texas, Kansas, and Nebraska that had the same problem. It's just a lot different now because so much more is controlled by leadership in both the House and Senate, and they've really much taken a lot away from the committee. But a lot of late nights, a lot of adult beverages to get through, and a lot of early mornings. But I would say probably the 2008 Farm Bill was the last real Farm Bill that got marked up from subcommittee to full committee, then to the floor, and then eventually to the president. That was also the Farm Bill that got vetoed twice by President Bush. So that was a fun thing to convince your boss to vote for it 3 times.
How do you go about convincing your boss?
You explain how important agriculture is to the 7th District of Michigan, and that agriculture is the number 1 commodity. And if people don't know, the state of Michigan is the 2nd most diverse ag state behind California, with all the different crops they have, and dairies and steer operations and everything else that the state has.
Mm-hmm. I get this question quite a bit from Hill staffers, whether or not they should stick around to work on a farm bill or if they need to have that experience. From your point of view, do you think that is necessary?
I would say if you're a Hill staffer and you want to work in the agriculture industry and you want to work for a company like Tyson or a trade association, I would definitely work on a farm bill. Doesn't matter if you work for the committee or a member that's on the committee, you need to have that experience to actually see the whole process from the year or two before when you start having the hearings, when they start looking at it, and then the actual markup of the bill and moving forward and just working with all the different associations and companies and ag industries, and not only in your district or your state, but are nationwide. I remember when I was working for Mr. Wahlberg, I would have meetings from 8 o'clock to 6 or 7 o'clock every day, 15 to 30 minutes prior to that farm bill, just because people wanted to come in and talk with us. One, because we were a freshman member, and then two, being from Michigan, they wanted to make sure we knew what was important to the district and what was important to the state.
So on that farm bill, the 2008 one, you had to work on a negotiation between the National Milk Producers Federation and then International Dairy Foods on the dairy import assessment. How did you go about facilitating that negotiation? Was there any challenges kind of having communication between the two?
Sure. So we had Kraft and ConAgra, which were representative in the district and the state, and they had this issue with trying to bring this export dairy product into the United States. Wasn't being made here, so they needed that for their products. And so we were working with National Milk, and then had to also work with Michigan Milk, and then IDFA, International Dairy Foods Association, because Kellogg and Kraft were members. And so we were trying to make sure everything was taken care of. The biggest thing was finding, I was working for a Republican who was in the minority and working with the majority and working with the staff subcommittee director to make sure that our amendment was in there. And after many late nights, early mornings, and basically right before markup, we got, at that time, Mr. Boswell was the chairman of the subcommittee, and Mr. Colin Peterson was the full chair. Got them to sign off. Mr. Wahlberg talked with folks, and we had already gotten the approval from the Republicans and ranking members. But it was a lot of late nights and early mornings of working with folks and lots of bill drafts. And there was a lot of tempers and maybe some punches want to be thrown, but I look at politics and working in DC, especially farm bill time, is just like sports. You fight each other all to the end, and then when the game is over, you shake hands and you move on, and hopefully go out afterwards and have a beer or two and get to know people a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. So moving on further into your career, you have also handled government relations for an association with National Meat Meat Institute, and then also company Tyson Foods. So is there a big difference between handling government relations between an association and a company?
Absolutely, it's completely different. So at a trade association, you're going to have members. So when I worked at American Meat Institute, which is now the North American Meat Institute, we had to make sure folks like Tyson, Cargill, JBS, National Beef were all taken care of. A lot of those folks have offices here like Tyson. Some of your smaller members don't. And so you got to make sure they're taken care of. Working for a company, it's all specific company. It's based on what the company needs, what the business units need, where the shareholders are, where the executives are, and also your board members. Trade association, a lot of time you're working at the 10,000 foot level. You're trying to represent a whole industry together. Company, you're getting very specific. It could be an issue related to one plant, or it could be just on the beef, chicken, or pork side. It's just a completely different approach to lobbying the Hill. It's actually helpful doing both, because I have an understanding now when I'm working with my trades and then working with the company, I can explain how the trades will benefit us, or if this needs to be a Tyson specific issue, or we need to have a trade lead on it.
Okay. So I do want to pivot our conversation and talk a little bit about the Congressional baseball game. And I'll be honest, I don't even know how to go about asking a question about this, but on that day, do you recount or remember of what all happened during that day?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was June 4th, 2017. June 14th, 2017. We're coming up on the 4-year anniversary here. Actually, Wednesday this week, we start practice with the Republican baseball team at 6 a.m. in the morning. It's just like getting up to work on the farm, where I'm up at 5 o'clock and out at the field at 5:30 setting up. But yeah, that day I will remember as much as I can. My mind has blacked out a lot of it, but it was like any other day. It was the last practice before the game. The game was supposed to be the next day, and it was a beautiful, Wednesday morning. Everything was great, and then right around 7:05, we heard some loud bangs. The first bang just sounded like a large, crashing of a equipment, or just there was a lot of construction in the area. The second one, I was standing next to Ryan Thompson, who's a former Marine, and we both looked at each other and yelled "gun," and that's when we realized we had a shooter on the field with about 40 members of Congress, baseball staff like myself. Actually, there was a lot of wives and kids there because they were all in town for the game the next day. So it was basically chaos for what I've been told by the FBI and CIA, and everyone that looked into it. And the Capitol Police, it was 9 minutes, but it felt like 40 to 50 minutes. For folks that don't know, I was shot twice, once in the chest and once in the arm. I was then in the hospital for 5 days in the ICU, and then another 5 days in the in the hospital, and then was released after 10 days and spent about 6 months of PT working on my hand, my arm, and then my chest area where the bullet entered on my right side and came out and missed my heart by less than half an inch. So I'm lucky to be here. The man above has a better plan. So, here, and every day is a blessing. So just kind of enjoy the good things in life and move forward. But yeah, remember everything. I don't remember what I look like. There's pictures. I remember looking at myself, but that whole picture in my mind is kind of blocked out. So I did have a big hole in my chest, but can't remember anything about it.
So kind of talking about the recovery, when you were in the hospital about to go under surgery, they kind of gave you the nickname Wolverine. Can you kind of explain a little bit more how you got that?
Yeah, so, for as bad as that 9 minutes was that day, a lot of great things came out of it. Officers David Bailey and Krista Greiners have become some of my best friends. They were Steve Scalise's detail that day. There's 5 of us shot that day. Mr. Scalise, congressman who had his detail there, both Greiner and Bailey were shot, myself, and then Zach Barth. So anybody who's had a traumatic experience or a major surgery like that, on Wednesday, they just try to get me stable. So my trauma surgeon, Dr. Libby Schroeder, who's her favorite theme is, for life is clear eyes, full hearts, with everyone knows Friday Night Lives. I actually have it hanging in my room, and also I have a t-shirt on it, so it's one of my favorite mottos. She had told my family that basically 3 options are going to happen, and one was she's going to open up and have to do a bunch of different surgeries. 2, I would have to do X, Y, and Z, and then 3, we're going to open up and we're not going to know what's there, because they take all the x-rays, but they don't know until they open up. The biggest thing is she had opened me up and my body had already started healing. And basically, GW Hospital is a teaching and learning hospital. She had to bring in all the doctors and nurses to show them this and to see what happened. And when she came back to my folks, which she said, "Oh, it's only gonna be an hour surgery." Again, I'm knocked out. I guess it was like 2 or 3 hours later. They were really concerned, but she's like, this was a really good thing. So because I was healing, it was like Wolverine, like the X-Men character, which is great because it's my favorite X-Men character. So I got the nickname Wolverine.
Okay. So when you were in the hospital, did you have any particularly national baseball players come and visit you?
Yeah, so a good friend of mine reached out to the Washington Nationals, and so they came by, and Jason Worth, who was on rehab on his ankle, came by and visited me and stopped by. I had no idea that, one of the favorite Nats of all time was going to come in, and they brought in all these hats and balls and his jerseys. And actually now Jason and I are some of the closest friends that we go and I visit him. He's now down in Florida, retired. We play golf together, hang out, and that one visit was just amazing. I actually got to go a couple months later and got to do batting practice and infield with the team, and then went to the game that night. Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed to take batting practice because my doctors wouldn't sign off. I look back on it, I should have taken it, but I followed my doctor's advice. But yeah, Jason and I are very close. His family's great, and again, it's one of those great things, miracles that came out of that day. For again, as bad as that 9 minutes was, everything that happened afterwards was just amazing. So. Mm-hmm.
Well, you brought up golf, and I've been told you have a pretty mean golf swing. So is that something that's one of your favorite hobbies, or what can people find you doing?
Everything I do is sports related. So it's either baseball, softball, golf, hockey, going to a sporting event, just enjoying it. I grew up with my brother playing sports all the time, and in Detroit, we'd always go to a Tigers game. We'd watch the Red Wings on TV. My family is from Pittsburgh, so grew up watching the Pirates and Steelers and Penguins. So our whole life and our family was pretty much geared around sports. And so if anybody knows me, they know I'm always either going to a game or playing or always involved with. But yeah, I do play a lot of golf. Not saying the game is getting better, but I do enjoy it. Having a baseball swing on a golf course is not a good thing.
For your job with Tyson Foods, do you get to travel often, or do you like to travel? I guess, is there a particular place that you like to go to?
Yeah, so work travel, most people know headquarters, Springdale, Arkansas, 30 minutes down the road from Walmart. Also in that 30-mile radius is J.B. Hunt. So you've got 3 of the largest corporations in America that are involved in food and ag. So good to go back to headquarters, once a quarter usually, and then anytime we have a plant tour with an elected official, federal, state, or local, someone on our federal team or state team gets to go. So that's always fun. It's actually my favorite part. I love going to plants, meeting the people that work there, seeing the whole process of the animals coming to the facility, and then what comes out on the back end. For fun, travel, always it's around sports or golf or baseball or visiting family and friends. With the pandemic, the last year and a half, it's been a lot harder to travel. But now that I'm fully vaccinated and a lot of the people, it's a lot easier to see people. I hadn't seen my dad and stepmom in almost a year and a half. Got to see them earlier this year, and then hopefully get to see my brother and sister later this year when our schedules allow it. So.
Mm-hmm. So looking back on your career, would you say there's a particular person out there that you look up to as like your mentor that you can maybe talk about?
Yeah, there's a couple folks. The biggest one would be Dave Pelsrock. He was my first boss, the state rep. I ran his campaign twice, worked for him for 4 years, always been helpful. You kind of move along, you learn. Another one that is no longer here in DC, he's actually back in Michigan, is a friend of Dave Pelsrock is Jason Rowe. He was a chief of staff out here from Michigan. His dad was huge in the local politics back in Michigan, and now he's the executive director of the Michigan Republican Party. So I always asked him why he wanted to do that job, and congratulations. He's like, I don't know, maybe I just want to beat myself up because, it's one of those jobs, no matter what you do, it's never good enough. But those 2 folks have always been around. They've always been helpful, really got me into politics and appreciate it. But as I mentioned earlier, my whole family is involved, from my stepsister, my stepmom, my dad, my brother and sister. Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter dinners are always fun because we cover both sides of the aisle and all gamuts. So all of us have either worked in politics or worked on the Hill, either at the state level or federal, or lobbied on it, or been involved in some type of campaign. So a little bit of history there with my family.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we wrap up, we always like to end the interview with this question, but if you could go back to day one, knowing what you know now, what advice would you tell yourself?
Well, day one on the Hill, I would tell folks, as a young Ag LA, rely on lobbyists and also rely on those folks back in the state. So for me, it was Michigan Farm Bureau, it was Michigan Agribusiness, it was Michigan State. It's one of the best ag grant schools in the country. Use those local folks because they know everything. The other thing my dad taught me on any job you have early is, close your mouth, open your eyes and ears. And probably the 2 most important people you want to know in an office or in a building is that person that sits up front, and then the custodian, whoever controls the keys, because you will lock yourself out of the office or out of the parking lot or out of the garage, and you're going to need that individual that has those keys to help you out. And the one thing I've learned, and I think most people know this in DC, is that intern or staff assistant that sits up front, one day they could be chief of staff, or one day they could be the member of Congress. So treat them with kindness. Treat everyone the same. Treat them as your mother would want to be treated. Don't be mean to them, because one day you might be asking them for something, or they'll be asking you for something.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, appreciate it.